In this episode, we're going to take threat intelligence from being a pile of interesting information and turn it into a disciplined process that reliably supports decisions in an OT environment. Beginners often think intelligence is something you subscribe to, like a news feed, and then you forward the most alarming items to colleagues. That approach usually creates noise, fatigue, and confusion, especially in OT where teams cannot react to every headline without risking uptime and safety. The intelligence lifecycle is a practical model that explains how intelligence should flow from questions to collection, through analysis, into communication, and back through feedback so it gets better over time. In OT, this matters because the environment has constraints, the consequences can be physical, and the most useful intelligence is intelligence that changes what you do, not intelligence that merely increases anxiety. A life cycle approach helps you build a habit of asking, what decision does this support? What evidence do we need? What does it mean in our context? And what action should follow if it matters? When you understand the life cycle, you can make intelligence a steady capability rather than a bursty distraction. The goal here is to explain the major stages of the life cycle in plain language, show what each stage delivers, and highlight how feedback loops keep the process grounded and useful. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. The starting point of an intelligence life cycle is not collection, even though collection is what people tend to notice first. The true starting point is direction, meaning defining what you are trying to know and why you need to know it. In many organizations, intelligence fails because teams collect everything they can, then drown in it, because there was never a clear question guiding the effort. In OT, direction is especially important because resources are limited and reaction must be careful, so you must focus on intelligence that supports high-impact decisions. Direction can be expressed as requirements, like understanding threats to remote access pathways, identifying which vulnerabilities affect critical OT products, or learning which tactics are being used to move from business networks into control zones. Beginners sometimes assume requirements are formal paperwork, but they can be as simple as a shared list of questions that the intelligence effort must answer. When requirements are clear, they also help you prioritize sources, because you can ask which sources are most likely to answer those questions. Direction also helps with measurement, because you can evaluate whether the intelligence program is producing useful answers. Without direction, intelligence becomes a stream of unrelated facts. With direction, intelligence becomes decision support. Collection is the stage most people recognize, and it is the act of gathering information from sources that could help answer your requirements. In OT, collection includes external sources like vendor advisories, industry reporting, vulnerability disclosures, and community sharing, as well as internal sources like logs, asset inventories, change records, access reviews, and incident reports. Beginners sometimes assume collection is only external, but internal collection is often more valuable because it reveals your actual exposure and control health. Collection also requires curation because not every source is equally credible, timely, or relevant to OT. For example, a general security feed might be high volume and low relevance, while a vendor advisory feed might be lower volume but directly relevant to products you use. Collection in OT should also be safe and sustainable, meaning it should not require constant manual effort by busy operations staff. This is where structured routines help, such as regular review of vendor bulletins, regular updates to asset vulnerability status, and periodic checks of remote access usage patterns. The key is that collection is guided by requirements, so you do not collect for curiosity alone. When collection is disciplined, it produces an input stream that analysis can actually handle. Analysis is the stage where information becomes intelligence, because it is where you interpret what you collected and decide what it means for your environment. In OT, analysis must bridge two worlds, the external world of threats and vulnerabilities, and the internal world of your architecture, critical assets, and operational constraints. A vulnerability announcement, by itself, is not intelligence until you know whether you use the affected product, where it is deployed, how exposed it is, and what the consequence would be if it were exploited. Similarly, a report about a threat actor targeting an industry is not intelligence until you assess whether your threat surface matches the observed access methods and whether your controls would detect or block the relevant steps. Beginners often assume analysis is simply summarizing an article, but analysis is actually evaluation, prioritization, and contextualization. It includes judging credibility, understanding uncertainty, and translating technical claims into operational implications. Analysis also includes deciding what to do next, such as whether to initiate a triage effort, increase monitoring focus, or plan a mitigation. In OT, analysis must be careful not to recommend actions that would create operational hazard, like urgent changes that cannot be validated safely. Good analysis produces a clear conclusion and a clear rationale, not just a restatement of what was collected. One of the most practical outputs of analysis in OT is a set of relevance determinations, which are decisions about whether an intelligence item matters to your environment and how much. Relevance is shaped by factors like whether the affected systems exist in your inventory, whether the exposure pathways are present, and whether the systems are critical to safety or production. Beginners sometimes treat relevance as a binary, but it is often a spectrum because an issue might be relevant to one plant and not another, or relevant to a monitoring system but not to a safety-related zone. Analysis also considers time sensitivity, such as whether exploitation is currently being observed or whether a vulnerability is theoretical. This time sensitivity matters because OT mitigation often requires scheduling, and urgent action should be reserved for issues that truly demand it. A mature analysis practice also considers compensating controls, meaning even if you cannot patch quickly, you can reduce exposure through segmentation, access control, and monitoring. The analysis output should therefore include options, not just alarms. When analysis produces relevance and options, it becomes actionable without being chaotic. Dissemination is the stage where intelligence is communicated to the people who need it in the form they can use. Beginners often assume dissemination means sending an email to everyone, but broad broadcasting is a common way to create fatigue and distrust. In OT, dissemination should be targeted because different stakeholders need different detail and different urgency. Operations leaders may need to know whether there is a credible risk to uptime or safety and what actions are being requested. Engineering teams may need to know which systems are affected and what mitigations are feasible. Security teams may need technical details to adjust monitoring and to coordinate incident response readiness. Dissemination, therefore, involves tailoring the message, but it also involves clarity because ambiguous messaging leads to inconsistent action. A good dissemination product includes what happened, why it matters in our environment, what we should do, who owns the action, and what timeline is expected, all without sensational language. It should also define confidence level, so recipients understand whether the information is firm or uncertain. In OT, dissemination should respect operational cadence, meaning it should not demand immediate change unless absolutely necessary and justified. When dissemination is clear and targeted, intelligence supports coordination rather than confusion. A key beginner misunderstanding is thinking dissemination is the end of the intelligence process, as if sending a message completes the cycle. In reality, the most important part of the life cycle is what happens next: actions, validation, and feedback. If intelligence leads to a mitigation, you need to track whether the mitigation occurred and whether it reduced risk as intended. If intelligence leads to increased monitoring focus, you need to track whether monitoring produced useful signals or only noise. If intelligence leads to a decision to accept risk temporarily, you need to track the conditions of that acceptance and the review date. This tracking ties intelligence to governance because it ensures intelligence does not become a stream of unclosed loops. Beginners sometimes feel overwhelmed by this, but the reason it matters is that closed loops build trust. When stakeholders see that intelligence items lead to clear actions and those actions are tracked, they take intelligence more seriously. Without closure, intelligence becomes background chatter. In OT, where attention is limited, closure is what preserves credibility. Feedback loops are the stage where the intelligence program learns and improves by using results to refine requirements, sources, and analysis methods. Feedback can be explicit, like operations telling you that a certain alert type was too noisy or a recommended action was not feasible. It can also be evidence-based, like noticing that certain sources consistently provide timely, accurate information about products you use, while other sources generate irrelevant noise. Beginners sometimes assume feedback is optional, but without it, the intelligence process does not adapt, and it will slowly become less relevant. In OT, feedback loops are essential because environments differ, and what is relevant to one organization may not be relevant to another. Feedback also helps refine requirements, because early requirements might be too broad, and experience will show which questions produce useful decisions. The life cycle becomes more efficient over time because you collect better, analyze better, and disseminate better as you learn what works. This is how intelligence becomes a capability rather than a hobby. A mature feedback loop also encourages humility, because it acknowledges that analysis has uncertainty and that outcomes are a source of learning. In OT, humility and learning are part of safety culture. Another important aspect of the intelligence life cycle is balancing timeliness with accuracy, because OT decisions often cannot be made on rumor. If an intelligence item is urgent, you may need to disseminate quickly, but you should still separate what is known from what is suspected. If an item is uncertain, you may disseminate a watch notice, meaning a heads-up with clear guidance about what to monitor or validate, rather than a demand for immediate changes. Beginners sometimes think speed is always good, but in OT, rushed actions can create downtime or safety risk, so timeliness must be balanced with verification. This is where internal validation becomes part of the cycle, such as checking whether the affected product exists in your inventory, whether the vulnerable feature is enabled, and whether exposure pathways exist. Verification does not always require deep technical analysis, but it does require disciplined checks that ground decisions in your environment. When you balance timeliness with accuracy, you avoid both paralysis and panic. The life cycle supports this balance by providing stages that formalize validation and interpretation. In OT, this balance is part of professional risk management. The intelligence life cycle also intersects with the controls calendar and risk disposition processes we discussed earlier, because intelligence should feed routines rather than constantly interrupt them. When intelligence identifies a new vulnerability affecting critical systems, the response might be to trigger a controlled triage process, schedule mitigations, and document residual risk decisions. When intelligence identifies a new tactic being used against remote access pathways, the response might be to validate remote access controls, adjust monitoring, and perhaps accelerate an access review. These responses can be aligned with existing routines, so they are executed predictably. Beginners sometimes assume intelligence creates one-off work, but the best programs use intelligence to tune existing processes rather than inventing new ones each time. This reduces chaos because the organization responds through known pathways. It also improves measurement because you can track how often intelligence triggers changes and whether those changes reduce risk. When intelligence is integrated into governance, it becomes more sustainable and more trusted. In OT, integration is the difference between intelligence being a distraction and intelligence being a force multiplier. Finally, using the intelligence life cycle in OT is about turning information into a reliable decision support system that respects safety, reliability, and real operational constraints. Direction ensures you collect with purpose. Collection gathers relevant inputs. Analysis turns inputs into contextual intelligence. Dissemination delivers the right message to the right people. And feedback loops improve the process over time by learning what worked and what did not. For beginners, the most important takeaway is that intelligence is not a product, it is a process. And the process matters because it prevents noise from becoming panic and prevents important signals from being ignored. When the life cycle is working, intelligence items lead to clear decisions, actions are tracked, and the program becomes more confident because it is learning continuously. OT environments cannot chase every threat headline, but they also cannot afford to ignore credible, relevant risks. The intelligence life cycle is how you navigate that tension with discipline, keeping intelligence useful, calm, and aligned with the realities of industrial operations.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.